Okay, welcome everybody to this session. In the run up to the BVL International Conference that's going to happen in Berlin in a few weeks. A few things. I first would like to ask you to mute your microphones during the sessions, and if you have any questions, then please ask them in the chat function. We will continuously have a look at that and see what's happening there. So you may also want to put up your thumbs. We noticed that you cannot raise your hand, but that you can put up your thumbs. So that's also something that we can get your attention to. If you would like to, we have a lot of people attending this session, so it's too much to all introduce yourself. But if you would like to just leave a brief note into the chat function to let us know who you are and what you expect of this session. That session will be recorded, so that's something that you may want to notice. If you have any problems with that, let us know. And I'm really pleased to have this set of keynote speakers that we have for this session today. I'm really proud to have here with us Nanja Hedal Kleuverpris. Sorry if I pronounce your name not correctly, Nanja. Nanja is a project lead corporate environmental strategy at Novo Nordisk, and she will share with us some insights of Novo Nordisk with us later on about circular strategy, of course. Then we have with us Mr. Dylan McNeil. He's a Director of Supplier Sustainability at Philips. And also Dylan will share some of his ideas and also about the strategy of Philips, of course. And then we have with us Mrs. Hedda van Raalte of the University of Applied Sciences in Rotterdam. And we're very delighted to also have Hedda with us because she will also share from her experience as an educator. She also will share the bridge from academics to practice and with respect to circular strategy. So I'm really happy to also have Hedda on board. And also, of course, last but not least, my colleague Noah Schau, who is also here to co-host with me. We will start with a short introduction by Noah, and then we'll have the keynote of Nanja. Then we'll play a voting session of the Blue Connection of the circular strategy game that we created as InChange, and we'll play ourselves. So we'll really go through the game together. So in part one, then Dylan will share his thoughts with us in his keynote session. We'll do another round of gameplay of the Blue Connection. And then at the end, we will also have Hedda sharing her experiences from an academic point of view. So let's start with Noah. If there's anything you would like to add to that, Noah, something I forgot to say maybe?
No, I think that's great. As you can see today, I'm sitting here in our pretty office in the Netherlands. It's raining as always, and unfortunately, it's only me. We were planning to have Corinne next to me, but due to the developments surrounding COVID-19, we thought we prefer this setup. And yeah, I will just give a brief introduction to the topic of for which we are all here today, the circular economy. So look at why should we go circular? Where are we in this process, and where lies the potential for this? But also, how did the company perspective change over the past years? So let's start with the why. And I think we all know that we have increasing population all across the world. We have increasing urbanization, and this growing wealth has just led to more and more resource extraction. And this increasing resource extraction, waste, and emissions have just gone beyond the Earth's capacity. So in the words of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we have to really go away from this linear make, dispose system towards a more regenerative model where we really minimize waste or even turn waste into the food for the next cycle. That in very general terms, but now as a next part, I'm not sure how what all your backgrounds are, but to look at where are we currently in terms of circularity, we can look at a question that the circular economy has asked, which is how circular is the global economy? And they have answered that question with the Circularity Gap Report. And I would like to open the first poll now to ask how circular are we? And you can, as soon as the poll is open, you can start voting. Is the poll opening? Is the voting possible? I don't see any reactions currently.
Yeah, we're viewing the results. 12 of 20 people voted.
Mm-hmm.
And we're now at 46% for the first option and 54% for the second option.
All right.
We are biased audience, Andrea says. Yeah, we are.
Yes, and I think that's already an outcome I can work with. So most people vote for B, 8.6%. Many people also vote for A, 3.6%. Well, let's start with the good news. It's not 3.6%. The bad news, however, it's still quite low. It's 8.6%. And actually, we went down from 9.1 in the past year towards 8.6 in 2020. So it's not even a development upwards, but we actually are going towards a more linear dynamic, and so that really shows how much needs to be done still. But a really interesting insight. And another point I want to mention is also by the LMAC Foundation, an article that has been shared where they say in terms of total global emissions, we are currently at 55% that are due to the energy sector. But 45%, and that's usually where we focus on, but 45%, that's products. And that's really where the circular economy can have a huge impact. So these 45% need to be tackled as well. And now let's look at the company perspective. So let's take the former perspective, I like to call it, where companies say, you know, we are a microeconomic player. What do we have to do with macroeconomic issues? And I think that can be a very legitimate argument by companies because they are in a dynamic where they have to make money, right? They are measured by profits. So it's very difficult to tell them create a positive impact if they're not benefiting by it in financial terms. So for many years, and it's still happening a lot today, sustainability has remained a marketing tool, which is of course not where we want to go. And that's, I think, where the circular economy comes in and has shown a different direction, a very concrete direction with very concrete concepts behind, and that it's developing. So more and more concepts are developing, and the circular economy offers there some advantages to companies that make it actually give them an advantage from a quantitative side and also from a qualitative side. So it becomes as a company, you can become leaner and more efficient working in a circular way. You can thereby decrease your costs, and also financial advantages such as getting a lower interest rate from banks. For example, ING is rewarding companies with a sustainable long-term business model with recurring revenues. Think of product as a service models, which are a lot more stable. You can get lower interest rates for that, but you can also improve your cash flow by bringing back value from returned products by offering a service model and others, and in the end increase returns. So there are quantitative advantages and also qualitative advantages. So you can satisfy a customer pressure that is increasing over the past years. More and more customers are asking for sustainable circular products. You can improve customer loyalty because you have a closer relationship to your customers, be it with maintenance, be it with repair, be it with also, again, product as a service model. And also legislation is sometimes slow, but it is changing, and there are legislative changes now and in the future. And by anticipating those, you can not only react to them and be ready, but you can even sometimes take advantage of them and be future-proof as a company. Also, more and more people, and I think especially the coming and the current generation that is entering the labor market, but also the existing generation and generations, they are really valuing more and more companies who build something that they believe in and that they say, yes, I think I'm doing something good here. And I think that's a very right argument to have. So it also helps you attract, retain, and engage talent. And in general, you will just become a better company. And I think that's something that is really valuable about this circular economy. It's not only something that creates something good, but it makes a lot of business sense. And that's really what we will look at today. So in one sentence, today we will look at, we will experience the potential of circular strategies. So yes, circular economy, it's more than recycling. What are the strategies available? How do you put them into action? But also, how do you measure circularity? And how do you manage the trade-offs? So between financial and circular decisions. What is really important in circular economy is that you are aligned within your company, but also around your company. So with the partners you work with. So we will also look at that. We will have to take some quick decisions and get a bit of a helicopter view about the circular transitions. And I'm really glad that we have such high quality keynote speakers today who will provide real world insights and also bridge the academic and the corporate world. And with that, I would like to end this introduction and hand back to Corinne and Nanya.
Thank you, Noah. Also wanted to introduce Noah. I forgot to do that. Noah is a business development manager at
Oh,
InChange, and
thanks.
he's working. Sorry.
Yes, thanks. I forgot about that as well.
I'm working in the team that focuses on global in corporate in company trainings. And Noah is also very interested and involved in the topic of circular strategy, and he's really becoming one of the thought leaders in this subject. So he's growing into that. Now let's go and go to Nanya. During 2018, Nanya was one of the leading players in the development of the 230 environmental strategy Circular for Zero. Extensive analysis of environmental issues, strategic insights, and involvement across the organization led to an ambitious strategy with strong top management support. And now she's leading a strategic cross-organizational project to implement circular thinking in product design, enabling the change to sustainable materials and design for recycling. So the floor is yours, Nanya, and we're really eager to hear about your experiences and strategy at Novo Nordisk.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to share our insights. I will see if I can share my screen. I'm not allowed to, I can see, but maybe I've sent my slides over, so maybe you can share for me. But let me start also by just explaining a bit more also what type of company we are. We are a pharmaceutical company, usually not with a big interest from our customers in terms of environment. Yeah, I'll try. So much of the work that, let me just be sure I can do this. Let's see, trying to talk and work at the same time. So good. So you could say this has not been driven by an external requirement from our customers to go towards more circularity, more circular products. It has actually been an inside process saying we want to move further and go into the next decade here with some really ambitious targets, being very much inspired by the circular economy. So yeah, as Corinne mentioned, my role is I've been part of developing the strategy, and now I'm also part of implementing it across Novo Nordisk, especially with focus on our products. I'll come back to that. Just a little bit about Novo Nordisk. I won't go through all the details here, but we are supplying about half of the world's insulin, helping patients with diabetes and other chronic diseases actually having a better life. So we're a global company headquartered in Denmark with about a little more than 40,000 people employed across the world. So yeah, the situation is critical. It calls for further action. We are at the front line of some of today's most pressing environmental challenges. We have the capacity to act and also lead the way. So this is also the basis of the Circular for Zero strategy. This is not only something we are doing, we also want to take others on board and inspire and lead the way. We have in long time back, actually, we had our first environmental department in the 70s in Novo Nordisk. So our history of taking care of the environment goes way back. But it has been developing all the time, initially focusing on, you can say, what we call end-of-pipe solutions, making sure that we're not polluting the local environment, and moving slowly towards the whole production, which has been in focus for the last 10 years or so in our previous strategy. But now we have also set, it's time to set some new ambitions, some new targets that actually covers the full company. The key environmental challenges that we see in our operation is the consumption of resources, the CO2 emissions, and waste. So these are the three focus areas, or the three key environmental challenges that we have chosen to focus on. That also means that we have chosen not to focus on biodiversity, for example, or a lot of other environmental challenges. It doesn't mean that it's not that we do not think about it and act on it, but it's not a key focus of our environmental perspective. We have set a very ambitious, you could say, leads that we want to have zero environmental impact. It's not a target. It doesn't have a specific date where we have to reach it, but it's shooting for the moon and saying we do not end before we have zero environmental impact. And this has been really inspirational also to the whole company, and also leading to a lot of new innovation, saying it's not about reducing 10% or getting rid of some nasty waste or whatever. It's really aiming for zero environmental impact in a very broad understanding. So we think it's very bold, but it's also quite simple. We want to minimize the consumption across our value chain. We want to eliminate waste and turn it into new resources, building on what we have done also for the past years and the experience that we have there. And then one of the key changes actually in the strategy is that we're also looking into how we design and produce our products so that they can be recycled. Yeah, so the strategy is called Circular for Zero, actually combining this circular economy approach with our zero environmental impact ambition. And we work across three focus areas. So you could say this, the way to get to zero environmental impact is by embracing a circular mindset that we are rolling out across the organization. We're working within three focus areas. The first one is circular supply, working with our suppliers to also take them on board this journey, thinking about what we purchase from suppliers and whether that could be more sustainable, but also collaborating specifically with suppliers to change their way of doing business. We're also looking at the circular company, so that is us and all the activities that we have, and in a broad sense. And then we have a focus on circular products, following, you could say, both the design process, but also what happens with our products when they become waste. And we have set targets within 7 key projects. 2 of them are communicated externally. The first one is that we want all our suppliers to be based on 100% renewable power. I'll come back to that. And the other one is that we want to have zero CO2 emissions from operations and transport by 2030. We do have targets for the rest of this, but we have not made them public yet. We're also working on how to actually measure this in a good way. But just to take you through the 7 projects we have on the circular supply side, we want to reduce the footprint of our suppliers, working with them, collaborating, making them make the same transition to renewable energy as we do. And then we're also looking into how we can ensure circular procurement. It's both on the raw material side, looking at changing to more sustainable raw materials, of course, also reducing the amount of raw materials that we use, but also taking into account that we are a big company using many PCs, desks, furniture of all kinds, catering, and so on. So actually looking at that from a very broad perspective, saying everything that we purchase should be circular products or circular services. We have been working for quite some years now on transferring our energy consumption into renewable energy, and we'll continue on that journey. And we have also started working more intensively on how we can reduce the emissions from business flights and company cars and the distribution of our products. So all that is included in this zero CO2 target for 2030. We are also continuing the work that we have in our production going back many years on recycling and so on. And we want to eliminate waste of energy, water, and materials, meaning that we do not use more energy, more water, more materials than is absolutely necessary. So we are reusing internally, recycling internally, and optimizing production, making it more efficient all across the production sites. Then we have kind of the odd one, you could say, supporting our affiliates going green. So that is very much a focus that goes directly to our different affiliate offices across the world, taking them on board this journey. To them, it makes a lot of sense to work with this locally. Also, they also want to take responsibility, and we want this to be something that is integrated into every part of our business. So even though it may be an affiliate that in itself do not have a big impact from renting an office or having an office building, sales cars and so on, but in total it makes up a not insignificant part of our overall footprint. And we also do see this as a way of telling the local stories so when our sales representatives go out there and talk to the doctor, for example, saying this is a sustainable business, and what we have done locally is this. So it also becomes something that is much closer to their heart. So there's definitely also a commercial perspective in this. In terms of the circular products, we have a project focusing on how we can design our products for circularity. So thinking into the future, both on the products that are in the pipeline or being developed, how can we make sure that they fit into a world where we want to make them fit into a circular economy. But we also do have products that are already on the market that we want to change into more circular products. And then we have the last part, which is about taking responsibility for the products that we put on the market. When we talk about products in Novo Nordisk, we have different types of medicine, usually in injection devices. So the majority of products that are at the end of life in our company is injection devices that are not currently being recycled anywhere in the world. So we have taken on that challenge to actually take responsibility for all these devices that would otherwise end up in a landfill or maybe in an incineration plant. So we reached this year a target to have 100% of our production running on renewable power worldwide. So that means that we have found solutions for solar power, hydropower, wind power, and so on across the world. Leading to 100% renewable power in production. And we have just a few years back asked our suppliers to follow us. So we launched a target to have 100% renewable power in all suppliers. And that will be a bit of working with them on making the transition, sharing the knowledge that we have from our transition to renewable power. And also start pushing this into tenders and contracts and pushing them to go in this direction. Some of them are all ready to do this or have started the journey already. Maybe a few of them have even reached the target, but the majority of the 60,000 suppliers are not there yet. So that will be a very interesting journey. And this is also a sign that we want to drive this as a partnership. So this is a way for us to work with circular economy, that we cannot solve everything ourselves. And it doesn't matter if we only look at what we do ourselves, but we need to collaborate with others in the value chain. And actually this goes back the way that we have been collaborating on environmental sustainability quite some years actually. Maybe some of you have heard about the Kalundborg symbiosis. So it's one of our biggest production sites is in Denmark, in the city called Kalundborg, where we together with some of the other companies in Kalundborg for many years have set up a system and further developed that where we use each other's waste so it becomes resources for another company. I think this is a great example of great collaboration and also how far you can get by collaborating. So actually now more than 635,000 tons of CO2 are saved every year due to this symbiosis collaboration. When we then dive into the products, my focus is primarily on these injection devices. We're also working on actually getting the medicine more circular. It's a little bit more tricky when you have something that is consumed by the patient, whereas in terms of the devices, you have actually a physical product where you can talk about circularity in another way. And what we did was, first of all, also to get people on board in Novo Nordisk and those that are working with developing our devices, saying what is it actually we talk about when we talk about a circular product flow. And we, one of my colleagues did this drawing saying, so we have some input that could be fossil or bio-based materials. We have a production site where we have recycling. Then we have distribution to the patient. And then what happens with the product when it becomes waste is that it either goes to landfill or incineration. But what we want to create is actually the big green arrow in the bottom here saying recycle, because that is kind of the optimal way of doing this. And it doesn't exist at the moment. So we had to translate what does circular products mean in Novo Nordisk relation, and this was the first step. Then we also discussed how can we measure circularity at a product level, because we do have some ways of measuring the degree of sustainable materials we're using as raw materials. We know how to measure on carbon emissions according to the greenhouse gas protocol, and there's a lot of standards for doing that, but there's not really a lot of standards on how to measure at the product level. So we dived into a whole range of different potential indicators, also exploring the material circularity indicator, which we found really interesting and also very easy to, or maybe not very easy, but we could see the point in implementing that. At that time, we also found out that when we tested it and at our type of products, that it also had some weaknesses, and we actually chose not to use it, but we're still following the development within that. And I think maybe in the future, when we are also more mature in our company in terms of measuring circularity, I think it could be relevant to look into again. But the three indicators that we chose was first of all the carbon footprint. So in our world, we measure that as the kilograms of CO2 per patient per year, so that we are actually able to compare different types of devices, maybe one that is used only one time versus one that is a reusable device. And this is a measure that we were already using in Novo Nordisk. So we had the whole system built up to do this. And we knew how to do it. It was not something that was easy for the product developers to do, but we had a system set up where we could support them with this. Then we also chose to focus on the degree of sustainable materials in the product, actually also linked to our circular procurement target. So we're measuring just a simple calculation based on the bill of materials. How far are we in the journey towards sustainable materials? And I can also say that right now, what we're basically looking at there is shifting to renewable or bio-based plastics. But that is something that requires both some time and also it comes at an extra cost right now. So that is also some of the discussions we have internally. And then in terms of how can we actually make sure in the design phase that the products are able to be recycled at the end of life? We have taken in the recyclability or the degree of recyclability of the devices. How many of the different parts, if we disassemble it, how many of the different parts are actually in itself recyclable? And these are the two latter indicators that the product developers can calculate themselves. And the first one is something that we have a system in place to support them with. And we have found some interesting insights also in this and implementing that into every development project. And it has also given some surprises when comparing products and these parameters that it suddenly becomes much more clear to them where are the real issues in environmental impact. And then if we combine this with this circular product flow, we wanted to have something that goes across the whole product flow, measuring everything that we do to optimize this, and that is reflected in the carbon footprint. Then we're measuring on the input side in terms of the sustainable materials, and we're measuring on the output side in terms of what is the degree of recyclability. And then, of course, we are relying on that the project we have initiated on making sure that our products are actually recycled at the end of life is progressing. It's really a challenge to recycle our products. We have shown that we can do it with our internal scrap, but the whole system, setting up take-back systems, making sure that this is actually recycled in a good way, is really a difficult task. And I would also say, in terms of carbon footprint, using this methodology is also something that we do for actually across a lot of the different initiatives in Novo Nordisk. Using this to you could say evaluate whether we're spending more resources on doing good for the environment. That was actually the intention. So also, for example, in terms of setting up take-back programs, we do life cycle assessment or carbon footprint calculations to see whether we are actually spending too many resources on doing the collection rather than what comes out of the benefits of recycling. That was what I have chosen to take with you or to take you through today. I think one of the key you could say successes of getting Circular for Zero implemented across Novo Nordisk has been that we have involved, first of all, we have involved a lot of colleagues in developing the strategy, which means that a lot of them actually owned it from the beginning. But we have also started kind of a movement across Novo Nordisk, inviting everyone to be ambassadors, and we have more than 1,500 people who have actually signed up to be these types of ambassadors, sharing knowledge, making sure that we inspire each other and keep the wheels going. So thank you.
Thank you, Nanya. I do have a question. You also make use of other key performance indicators like the Material Circularity Index that was created by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, that we will also discuss in relation to the Blue Connection strategy game. Could you tell us something about that? Because I know that you are also using that.
Yeah, we looked into that at the product level. And actually set up a system to do this type of calculation. It also actually was a bit of a difficulty getting this right in terms of when we look into, for example, I mentioned bio-based products or materials that that is really not credited in the material circularity indicator. And I think for some of the you could say it's really evaluating also to which degree you are circling materials inside the company and at the end of life. And we have a really, you could say, simple picture there where we are actually recycling a lot of the waste that we produce, that comes out of our production, whereas we recycle nothing at the end of life of our product. So progress towards better scores on the material circularity indicator is a bit difficult because we are taking baby steps right now. So our evaluation of this in terms of the products was that it right now it's not the right indicator to drive change with it in that, and also it's a little bit dependent on where in the company you are in terms of how this can drive improvements and working with the designers, product developers. We had to make it a bit more simple so that you also actually understand what is it we are calculating and how does this fit into our work. So we took it a level down, you could say, using some of the elements of the circularity indicator tool.
Yeah, but just facilitate it or make it a little bit easier to also make the calculation of the performance indicator, because I can imagine that also for the carbon footprint measurement of the patient in kilograms, there must also be a difficult job to make that calculation. So where do you get the data? Do you ask the patients then, or that are using it?
No, it's actually a lot of the data for that calculation is based on our internal production. So what are the raw materials we use? How much energy do we use to produce the products? How does the distribution routes look like? Are we transporting by air or by truck or ship? And then what we do is actually setting up some standard patient treatment scenarios, you could say. So trying to set up an average patient in Europe, for example, and an average patient in the US. So that part of it becomes much more simple, because you're right that we could have like hundreds of thousands of different scenarios, right, depending on the individual patient. But also being able to compare across the products, we needed to simplify this. But you could say, in terms of doing the actual carbon footprint or life cycle assessment calculations, we have a dedicated software tool to do that. I'm also that is my background. I'm coming from this life cycle assessment world. So for me, it's easy. It's definitely not easy if you have not done it before. And of course, it has been a lot of work building this in Novo Nordisk. But right now, we actually have a model where we relatively easy can take a bill of materials, for example, put it into to our calculation model and get some results out of there. Of course, it takes time to do some of the data collection, but it's still it has become very operational for us now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Are there any other questions that someone would like to ask now? There will be more time for questions at the end of the sessions. No questions? Then thank you so much, Nanya, for this inspiring presentation. Really interesting. So I'll give the floor back to Noah to do an introduction of the Blue Connection and of InChange.
Yes, thank you, Corinne. As Corinne just mentioned, I will now briefly introduce you into the Blue Connection, which is the business game that we will use today to create this interactive element of the session. And for you to understand what the Blue Connection is all about, I asked you a relatively easy question. So how did you learn to ride and balance a bike? And that's what we as InChange base our work on. So we ask you, did you learn it by theory, so by reading a book or by reading a definition? And you will of course answer no. You would just jump on the bike and with your parents learn it by falling down, hurting yourself, getting back up, and trying again. So really learning by doing, and we call that experiential learning, and that's why we have developed these business games to at a university level and at a company level make learning more experiential. And that's the same idea for the Blue Connection. So learning circularity and experiencing circularity by doing it yourself. And that's what we will do today. So we will really look at the transition from linear to circular. And as said, we believe that you need to experience it once instead of just being told over and over. That's actually the circular bubble, sometimes it's called, because there's too much talking going on and not enough acting. So we try to today, and also in general sessions, usually they are a bit longer, like one day or even sometimes during a week. I think Hedda van Raalte can later on, when she has her speech, give some insights into that. So you go multiple times, you go through a circle of experiencing something, reflecting on your experience, getting new concepts, or reanalyzing the concepts you had before, applying them again, experiencing, and you go through this circle many times. You get experience in a safe environment. We call it a flight simulator for companies sometimes. And then you can apply this experience somewhere else in the real world afterwards. And that's what we will do in the Blue Connection. So I will give you now a brief introduction into what it is all about. And in general, we could say that we have a company, and we will become the management of that company, of the Blue Connection. And this company has a value chain that needs to become circular and profitable. So the company itself, it has a storage component, a component storage facility. It has it's assembling the components and creating a product, which is an e-bike. I actually have one bike here next to me as a little gadget for this session, in case you were wondering. And then this company needs to become profitable, because currently it's doing quite badly financially. It doesn't have a clear strategy, and the board, the customers, and the bank are pushing the company to do something else and to go circular, to get back on track. So we today we will be the management team to do this in hopefully a controlled and aligned way. Um, Given the time pressure we have, this will probably be not so controlled and aligned, but that's also then what we will look at in the end in terms of what did we learn and how could we have done better. So if you have more time and like over a full day, this can be, of course, really, you can deep dive into it and get a long lasting learning curve. So we will today take strategic and tactical decisions. More on this later on. This is our supply chain currently, so highly linear. We have a number of suppliers. They bring us materials and we will create components out of those materials. And then in the end, we make a finished bike, we ship it to our retailers, and they sell it to consumers. And in the end, the bikes end up in the trash. Now we have 4 departments where we can take decisions today. We will take decisions for all 4. We usually play those things in team, and then a team dynamic comes in, which we believe is extremely important. If you want to go circular, you need to do it within your company in an aligned way across all departments. So usually you would have one finance manager, one sales manager, and so on, and each of them have their own role of responsibility, and they have to communicate, they have to work as a team to go circular. And how can we do so? Here you will see the dark blue lines. That's how you can create a circular flow. So over here, you have the first part which can become circular, which is the design of the product. So creating, making a product out of materials that and components that can afterwards be reused or refurbished. Afterwards, then maintaining the bikes, that you extend the lifetime. You can give it a second life, even if you refurbish the product as it is when it comes back, and then sell it on the second-hand market. And you have also the option to then work with a third-party service provider who can then take the bike, they disassemble the bike, and then they treat the components, so they refurbish the components. And as you can see with this arrow, the components go back into our company. Or you can also decide to recycle materials so that you have them again back in your flow in the beginning of your value chain. You can also decide to do both. So the remainings of the refurbishment are then being recycled. Or you can decide to just take all the bikes that come back and send them to the trash. And we believe that in every process, there's always some waste, but ideally you want to minimize that and keep the value within your value chain. Another decision that is of course important is this arrow here. So how do I get my bikes back? Do I do a lease program? Do I give a buyback price on the bike? So that's of course also very important. And that's how we can transform our value chain. And we have to, we do so by designing a product, of course, and selling it, which is an e-bike, which has 6 components and of course the box it's coming in. And for each component, we have different suppliers we can choose. On the other end, so selling the bike, we have also 3 different retailers to sell the bike to. So we have one really big retailer where the customers really want value for money. That's about 60% of our market. So you can compare it to a big player in the market, like the big sports shops. Then you have Gearshift, a really high-end store where the consumers, they want a high-end product of good quality. About 25% of our market, and about 15% of our market is HBS. And those customers, they really value an environmentally friendly product, a circular bike, for example. And what is the challenge of today? The challenge will be to balance not only circularity, but also return on investment, so that you build a circular strategy that is also profitable. And we do so by looking at 2 key performance indicators. The material circularity indicator, we discussed it already a few times today, and we can also look at afterwards what it consists, and return on investment, so profitability of your company. So those 2 elements will be our indicators. And we can look at the material circularity index from 4 different perspectives. So what is it made of? It consists of How many virgin raw materials are we using in the beginning of our flow? How much unrecoverable waste do we have at the end of our flow? What is the lifetime of our bike? And how much is it being used? So those 4 elements make the material circularity indicator, and you can influence those with all kinds of decisions that we will take today. In the end, this is the linear flow, so the thick line and the dotted lines in between. Those are circular concepts you can bring in. So extend the lifetime of the product, refurbish components, and recycle materials. How about selling your bike? We have 3 different retailers, as we have seen, and the retailers, they have different sensitivities to a circular product, of course. So the big retailer, they will say, okay, nice, you have a circular product which might give my customers a bit more. So they will say, we will give you a premium on the sales price. So you can offer your retailers a certain degree of circularity based on the material circularity indicator. And if you promise this circularity, if you promise a circular product, you will get a premium on your sales price. That's what we call the contract index. So it acts like a multiplier on your sales price, which we fixed. So we don't look at demand today. And you can do the same with the banks, as I said already. ING, for example, they offer lower interest rates for circular business models, and we mimic that today as well by getting better contracts if we promise more circularity. And we do so in 4 different departments. And we will now look at that within the voting session, within the first voting session of today.
Okay, shall I take over the
Yes.
session now then, I think. Yeah. Share my screen with you. So you can see my screen now, eh? Just a brief check. So what you see here is the blue connection, but we'll get to that in a moment. What we're going to do now, it's now your turn, and this is a voting session. This is part 1. Part 2 will come later on. And what are we going to do in the voting session? Well, a voting session is kind of an interactive circular game that we will be playing, and it's a limited set of questions. And we're going to vote. So we'll have a few answers for you, and in the chat function you can give your vote to us, and the majority rules. So we will, or in this case, Noah will select the voting that has been or the majority that has been chosen. We'll give you 1 to 2 minutes per decision, so it's not like you can make a profound decision making. It's gut feeling, but just to give you an idea on what kind of elements are important when it comes to transforming a business from a linear to a circular strategy. We'll get to that. At the end of the whole session, we will do the calculation. So there will be another voting session, a few questions. And after all the questions have been answered, we will calculate the effect, and we'll see if we have really improved our performance. So we'll get to the first question. We have a couple of decisions on the agenda, and that involves all the roles in the game. So it's sales, purchasing, finance, supply chain management, and we'll also have another sales question. And we'll start with the maintenance of the product. So if I give you a small introduction to the game, this is the blue connection. And as you can see, we have the 4 roles here of purchasing, sales, supply chain, and finance. This is the first dashboard, and what you see here is the return on investment and material circularity indicator or index. And as Noah already mentioned, it has really been our purpose to make sure that we work on circularity, but that it is profitable at the same time. And the blue connection has been developed together with ING Wholesale Banking and Windesheim University in the Netherlands. Yeah, let me show you a bit around here. So here we have the finance overview that will also give you more information about the other or the other parts of the circularity indicator. We have here a depreciation graph, for instance, that will give you an idea about the different, the like the second-hand value of the bike, for instance, or component value. So that will give you a lot of information there. And now I'll go to the first questions that we have. That is on the sales, on sales, and that's the maintenance concept. So we have the possibility to offer an extra service to the market, a maintenance contract that is sold together with the bike. And if a bike has a maintenance contract, you will understand that the lifetime of the bike is extended. So the maintenance contracts, of course, will give you extra revenue. It has an effect on the lifespan of the bicycle, like I mentioned, but it will also have extra costs. It will also involve extra costs because you will have to have a capacity in the factory for the maintenance. So that will cost you some time. And the question that I have for you now is what do you think would be good to do now? Would you like to have a nothing? Oh, great. Noah created a poll for this. So what do you think? Do you want to choose no maintenance service, or would you like to choose bronze or silver or gold? I think the poll is now in front of the answers. Oh, there's a vote already. That's great. That's great. So I see people voting. That's very good. It's very quick as well. So we have kind of a lot of votes already in, and I think silver is winning at the moment. So okay. In the game, it's also, I think that's a nice feature. We also make use of IoT. So there's a small device built into the bike that will give a signal when maintenance is necessary. But of course, also that small device will also involve extra costs that also have to be calculated. So silver is the maintenance contract that was chosen. So what I do here, I go to the role of sales. I go to service, and then I say, okay, I negotiate. And it tells me that I can choose from bronze, silver, and gold. And I choose silver here. I say deal, and that's done. And I also do that for my other, this is Cheetah Cycling. This is my other customer. I do the same because we wanted to do this for all customers. I say silver again. I say deal, and that's how easy it is done. And then HBS, remember that's the customer with the customers that are very sensitive to environmental aspects. So I say deal, and that's it. So question answered. And as you can see here, I can calculate, but we'll do that at the end. So we'll first answer the questions. We'll go to the next question. We can choose another frame. And this has to do, the purchasing role is kind of very close to the product development role, because at purchasing or in purchasing, you choose the components that are in line with your strategy. So if you would like to focus on recycling, then you would choose frames or components that are in line with that strategy. Or if you have a strategy that's more focused on refurbishment, then you would choose components that are more in that line. Now we have different options here. We can choose a different supplier, and we can choose different component characteristics. I've made an overview of the different suppliers that we have. Our current supplier is Aluminous, but we also have Cifra, we have Skeletov, and we have Bicor. And they all have their own characteristics. Of course, it also comes with prices, so there are also different prices there. But for instance, Aluminous, our current supplier, is not very good in recyclability, but the others are better. Then we're here talking about refurbishability and the costs. It can also only refurbish like 20% of the frame, and the costs are €100. And here, yeah, there are other characteristics there. And it also has an effect on the durability, average, and this will prolong the lifetime of the bike. So yeah, so there's another poll then, I think, and so we can also make our choices here. So vote, please. And again, this is really you would, if you would play the game, you would go through all the reports that are there and you would take other decisions. But this is just to get an idea of what the game is like. So I think Cifra is most in favor. So let's choose then. Go to the game again. Yeah, Cifra was the one. So I'll go to purchasing. And I go to the supplier market. And oh, this is the frame light. As you can see, you can make this choice for all the components that we have. We have a saddle, we have a luxury box, which is the box. I think there's only one supplier for that. We have a motor, we have a battery. And so for all the components, and this is here, I think, where we can find that in the information. You would be able to see all the suppliers that are here. So there's a lot of information there about the customers, about the products, but also about the components. These are the components we're using here. But here you also see information about all the alternative components. And I'll give you information on the characteristics of that. But we'll go back to the purchasing. I'll go to the supplier market. And I go and search for another supplier for the frame. And it will tell me here, like, Cifra is here the supplier. So go and do this. Calculate. And deal. And there we are. So decision taken. We go to the next question. There's also a possibility in finance to decide upon a buyback price. And the higher the buyback price, the higher also the return on of the return flow of the bikes. It will give you some information in the graph that we have. So it's about this green arrow here. So once the bikes have been used, we offer the customers a certain payback price after a certain time. And then that will give us an impression of how many bikes will be returned. So if I go to finance now, and for instance, I will show you what happens. So here at buyback, if I edit this, for instance, if I say 20%, or let me start with 5, that's nice. Let me start with 5, I say save. And this will give me a depreciation graph. So I will see here, that's the yellow line that you see here. That's the buyback price. So that's 5% of the original price of 2,000 euros. And it will tell me something about, you see those gray columns over here. It will tell me something about the number of bikes that will be returned after a certain moment of time. And now if I increase that to, for instance, 20%, it will give me other figures. Oh, edits. It will give me other figures. Another depreciation graph, and it will show me something. There we go. So as you can see here, the buyback price has been increased, and it will show me here that in period 5, I will have a return of 187,000 bikes. Oh no, it's percent, 18% of the bikes. Yeah. So that's it. And here it will also give me an idea of how many bikes are coming back. So you can you can then calculate with that number. Okay, so the question now is, what should I do? Should I do 5%, 10%, 15% of 20 or 20%? So yeah, can take your votes again. 15%, 100% for 15%, so also 10%. This is a narrow one. So I think it's 10%, is it? Yeah. Let's do the 10%. So I go back to the game again. And I go to buyback price. And I edit. And I will say 10%. I'll save. And it will give me another depreciation graph again. So that's very dynamic in the game. So depending on the buyback price, you will have more or less returns at a certain moment in time. Okay, and the next one is also in supply chain management. We can also give the refurbishment age of a finished product. So refurbishing is the process where used components or products are restored to appear as new. And we can make that dependent on the age of the finished product of the bike. We could choose from 5, 6, 7, 8 years. It also needs capacity. We need 7 man-hours per bike are needed to refurbish. 60,000 bikes per year are sold, and only 70% of the bikes can be refurbished. And it's this part. Yeah. Okay. So after the refurbishment, they can be resold again. So we go to the game again, go to supply chain management. It's also in supply chain management. And we go to production and we can set an age here. Yeah, so would like to hear your vote. So what do you think? Should it be 5, 6, 7 or 8 years? If there are any questions in between, then please put them here. And also at the end, we'll do a debrief on this. This is always the very powerful part of playing the game, that we do a debrief. So that we also try to to draw conclusions from what we did, and that we evaluate what changes we made and what the impact was of the changes. So we say 8 years. Most of the people say 8 years. Yeah, I think we can conclude that this is 8 years. Yeah. So let's do 8 years. So I'll go back to the game again. And I say 8 years here. I do edit. Say 8 years. I save. That's it. So change has been made again. That was it. That was the first round of questions. And Noah will also Noah will do the second part, and we'll have another couple of questions for you. But now I would like to give the floor to Dylan. I will first do a small introduction about Dylan. Dylan McNeil is Director Supplier Sustainability at Philips. And we're really happy to have you here today, Dylan. At Philips, Dylan is responsible for one of the main programs to improve sustainability at suppliers. Philips has a fairly unique approach. For a few years now, the company has been analyzing what can be improved, making a business case around it, and then helping suppliers achieve their goals. Dylan's portrait was also for a moment on Times Square, as you can see here. And that's a picture that Dylan cherishes. He was an SDG pioneer, but maybe you also want to explain it a little bit yourself, Dylan, of Global Compact in 2019 at the General Assembly of the United Nations in New York. I think that's a great honor. So the floor is yours, Dylan. Very excited to hear about your experiences and your corporate strategy on circular.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. Very happy to be here. And indeed, it was a great honor. The UN recognizes on an annual basis, previously it was people up to 35 that are working in sustainability and are making an impact. And I have the privilege to work at Philips on some programs that are doing exactly that. But that's not the focus of today's conversation, of course. I'd like to start with a brief introduction of the company that I'm working for. Most of you will have heard of Philips before, I hope at least. So maybe take 5 seconds, close your eyes, and think of a product that you think of when you hear the Philips name or brand. Because I can tell you that there is a high likelihood that the product that you just had in mind is actually not being produced or sold by Philips anymore. There is a high likelihood that that product is maybe still produced by a different company and that licenses the Philips brand name. Because what is Philips today? It's really focused on health technology, with actually the biggest part of our sales coming from diagnosis and treatment devices. So that means large medical equipment, such as MRI devices, CTs, X-rays, all used to really understand what is happening in a human body to allow for effective treatment. Another big part of it is our connected care solutions, which then ties together everything that is happening in a hospital to make it seamless and effective and hopefully as efficient as possible. It allows for care that is produced remotely to allow for more efficiency and clustering, let's say, of hospitals and hospital services. And then still 30% of what we sell are actually consumer goods. Some of them you might still know, such as the Philips shaver, toothbrushes, or mother and child care devices. But at least light bulbs, TVs, radios, you still see them in the shop with the Philips name on it, but it's actually not anymore what Philips really makes. And this is just a brief background of actually what I just voiced over. So I'm going to skip that. So we've gone through quite a transformation as a company, and I'll take you to a quick flight of how also our sustainability approach has transformed over the years. We started as an organization in 1891, and already back then we had quite a lot of social programs in place that were very progressive for the time, such as offering a pension, offering a 5-day work week instead of 6, or offering housing to some of our workers just to make sure that we were able to attract the right talent, mostly in Eindhoven. So people that know that city probably are confronted quite a bit with the history of Philips. There they have the Philips Museum, but also a lot of other things that remind you of the impact that the company had on that city. It's actually since the 1970s that we started to evolve our focus much more towards the environmental agenda. In part, in the Netherlands at least, there were already civil society actors really challenging companies to step up, and we were happy to take that plate. But then in 1994, that was actually the first year that we launched a structured sustainability program, meaning that we had targets in place and that we were held accountable because we also provided transparency on how we were progressing against those targets. Since the 2000s, we've really accelerated our approach. We're no longer looking just at what is happening within the Philips gates, but also very much what is happening in our supply chain and what are the impacts that we're making with our products. Now, if we then focus on circular economy specifically, also there we have been going at it for a while. As I mentioned, in the 1990s, we started to develop really structured programs with targets, and that included, for instance, a recycling rate for the waste that we were producing in our sites. At the moment, that is at 90%, and we're obviously striving to get that to 100. Per 2020, we're already sending zero waste to landfill, and so the remaining 10%, that is still in the gap between 100% recycling, is used for incineration with at least heat recovery. Not the best, but still better than to just pile it up. Since the 1990s, we've also had a refurbishment plant. There's always been additional lines that Philips has that they sell to secondary or third tier hospitals, which are less interested to have the latest and greatest innovations that you might see in academic hospitals, but really the smaller ones that you see in smaller towns, for instance, across Europe, in the Netherlands, in Germany, wherever you're from. Then you'll see those small towns, and they also often need to have scanning equipment, for instance, or ultrasound devices, and that's where a lot of those refurbishments then come into play. Since 2013, we struck a partnership with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and ever since, circularity within our organization has increased tremendously. In 2016, we launched a program that is finalizing this year called Healthy People, Sustainable Planet. And that was actually the first sustainability program where we really set targets on circular revenues, how we call it. In 2019, 13% of our revenues were already circular. We're striving for it to be 15% by the end of this year, but for 2025, we want to have that at 25% of total revenues, which is quite a break, of course, from the Philips that you know, to have a quarter of its revenues coming from products that are either returned to us and put back in the market, or services instead of a typical manufacturer that focuses on volume, or having products that contain a lot of recycled content. So apart from that 25%, one other thing that we have is we want to further embed circular practices at our sites. As I already mentioned, the zero waste to landfill target. But for 2025, we really want to extend that throughout our office locations as well, that it's not just our manufacturing waste that gets recycled, but also the coffee cups, for instance, or pens that are no longer in use. And in addition, we want what we call to close the loop on all medical equipment, which means that we are always in the bidding whenever a large medical equipment or smaller medical equipment is end of life at the hospital, that we want to at least engage with that hospital and do them an offer to buy that product back, because we think that we are very well equipped to make use of the rest value of that product, even when it is no longer of use to that hospital itself. I feel a little bit that I'm preaching to the choir when I'm explaining the global trends that support the transition to the circular economy. If you look specifically at health tech, at least, there is a big trend of an aging population and increased cost of healthcare globally. And so there's a strong need to do things more efficiently with the same amount of resources. And so there is a big trend within our industry, at least, to move from volume-based care to value-based care. If you then also look at the steps that we are taking in the digital highway in terms of network capabilities, then obviously there's a lot more room for that connected care solution that I mentioned in the beginning, to step up, to centralize more healthcare and to thereby lower the cost of it to continue to keep it affordable for society. We also see that consumers are slowly changing their consumption patterns, where it is not so much focus anymore on ownership, but it's also very much on use. I doubt that a lot of the people here will own a lot of CDs, for instance, but the same goes for DVDs or Blu-rays. Everything is being streamed, and you see that also going into other industries. So we already have, for instance, in our offices, printers where we no longer are the owner of the printer, but we simply pay for print. And that's now actually something that we're also trying to introduce with our products, which is maybe less evident. But if you look at big scanning devices, we are slowly starting to offer those as a service. So instead of buying an MRI as a hospital, some of the propositions that we've been putting out is, for instance, that you can service an MRI machine, and then you simply pay us for each scan that is made with such a device. And the reason why we do that is not only because we want to stay relevant and keep our place in society, but it's also very much because we see a huge business case in that circular proposition, both for our customers as well as for ourselves. So I hope that most of you have seen this diagram before with the different loops that indicate then different versions of what a circular economy could look like. Now, if you look at Philips itself, I mentioned it already, offering products, for instance, as a service, or offering extended maintenance for those products, sometimes by connecting the devices and thereby setting ourselves up in such a way that we're very well equipped to see when maintenance is required, just to make sure that that lifetime of that product gets extended as long as possible. Once it does reach end of life and it is time to take it out of the hospital, we're happy to buy it back and refurbish it. If we're not already the owner still, then obviously we're also going to refurbish it. If that's not possible for all parts, maybe some parts can at least be recovered and can be used again for that servicing and maintenance. And if it is really end of life, there's not really any use anymore, then at least we can still recycle the materials. If you look, for instance, at some of our vacuum cleaners that we are selling to consumers, then we are now having a closed loop system with some of our vacuum, so that once it is broken down, you hand it in, they actually keep the Philips vacuum cleaners aside and give that back to us. And then we use that plastic and put that back into the old ones. And so we have vacuum cleaners now that are made of more than 65% recycled content. I think some of the ideas here on what the business opportunities are were also mentioned by Noah in his opening presentation. One that I want to highlight is entering new markets. I mentioned it already about second or third tier hospitals, which is a new market for us in terms of us properly addressing that. Philips likes to position itself externally as a premium brand, which means that academic hospitals and hospitals in big cities really looking for the latest innovation typically look at Philips to see what they have available. But if you look at that latest and greatest, then a lot of times that is far too expensive for a smaller town hospital that is relatively small, but still wants to offer proper services, for instance, because the distance to one of those big hospitals is simply not there. So they want to have their own scanning devices, they want to have their own support system for people that, for instance, are going through a pregnancy. And so they look then at us for refurbished products, which still get a very long lifetime, still get a very long guarantee, and in that sense are very fit for purpose, but it's more affordable. Another thing is that it reduces costs, obviously, because we are much better equipped ourselves, together with our suppliers, to make optimal use of the rest value of products, and that comes typically at a lower cost than buying it from virgin materials, and so it has a good impact on the bottom line when you look at, for instance, the refurbishment plant that we have. So how are we driving towards a circular economy in our products? I'll give you this overview, which basically gives the three flavors that we currently see for going towards 25% circular revenues. One of them relates to the hardware revenues. So for instance, reusing commercial returns. Now you can think that is a no-brainer, that is something that you should do. I fully agree with that. But if you look at doing that in a cost-effective way, it can be quite challenging for a lot of companies because they're typically not set up to allow for reverse logistics. They have a number of manufacturing locations globally that then provide actually their products to the entire world. They ship those to their different distribution warehouses. Those get shipped into customers, and at the customers, they're bought by consumers. You that, for instance, goes to MediaMarkt to buy a new coffee machine, for example. Now, if you bring back that coffee machine to MediaMarkt, then they need to ship it back to us, which goes to distribution. But then to ship it across seas, a single device, back to China, for instance, it is very costly if you look at the cost that it was actually there to make that coffee machine. And so setting ourselves up in our supply chain in such a way that we can service those and repair those and perform the required quality checks to then put it back into the market, having the insurance that there will be no brand damage because we're bringing out a faulty product, has been quite a challenge initially. We needed to really find local partners that can support us in that. So that's really the supply chain that we're now leveraging to do some of that work for us, because for our own network, it is simply too taxing, also given the low number of returns that we have, to then properly organize ourselves for such a thing. I mentioned already with refurbishing, typically if you look at the CT scanner or an MRI, you're talking about a device that is close to 1 million if you're talking about the newer devices. And so it's after 5 years already that if it is heavily used, that the service costs will start to increase. And that is simply for the academic hospitals. And so I mentioned already that we have a refurbishment plant. It's in Best in the Netherlands. Yeah, we happily bring out then new products again or refurbished products to increase that circular revenue percentage. Services I mentioned already from a healthcare perspective. What we're, however, also doing is we're exploring if this is something that consumers might be interested in. So we, for instance, have IPL devices that help for hair removal. And what we typically see is those devices are pretty expensive to buy. So not everybody does it at home. Sometimes people go to a salon to have that done for them. But if you use it, then you don't need to use it forever. You only need so many uses of that device before those hairs actually completely stop growing. And so then all of a sudden you're stuck with a device that might cost 400 euros, for instance. But we're now looking at, isn't it worthwhile for suppliers to source such a thing and use it for a short period of time before they return it? It gets cleaned, it gets refurbished, obviously, to make sure that everything is hygienic, so there's no concerns there, but then it gets shipped to the next person. And despite the entire world already embracing streaming services, I can tell you that when it comes to beauty products, that a lot of consumers still feel some resistance. Now, hopefully, the younger generation that I think is already much more on board with shifting that focus towards use instead of ownership will get on board also with these types of things because the impact of it is huge, of course, not only for everybody's wallet, but also in terms of the materials that are actually needed to produce such a product. Mentioned it already, sustainability or circular economy doesn't only focus on what we put out in the market, it also very much focuses on what happens at our sites. So by 2025, we want to really embed circular practices at our site by reducing material usage, reusing the materials, and recycling used materials, continuing to send zero waste to landfill, as we've done now. An example of also how we are shifting internally how we use our products is, for instance, with the printers. I mentioned it in the beginning, paper print. It was a very funny conversation. So if you look at most office locations, they obviously still have printers. And actually how most of the printer manufacturers make their money is in the maintenance of those machines. And it's also in the ink that they sell to companies to continue to keep printing. And so we challenged them a little bit that we are not interested in constantly having to facilitate all these maintenance people coming over, because it's not only that you have to then pay them to be there, but it's also that you need to facilitate them and you need to make resources available in your own company to adhere to that. We saw that the use of printing is obviously coming down because obviously everybody's much more aware that you should really only print if there's a hard necessity for it. Unfortunately, in office environments, you still see a lot of people thinking that there is a necessity, so printers continue to be used. But so we challenged them to come up with a service model instead of the old traditional model where they simply make their money from maintenance. And so we came to a paper print solution where what we see now is that the printers that we got, they were changed. And if you then look at the maintenance that those new devices require, it's much lower. And why is that? It's because the manufacturer is all of a sudden incentivized to come up with a design that is less designed to fail, which is still a common design practice actually for most manufacturing companies. And so because of that, they don't want it to fail. Why? Because if it fails, it means that we stop printing and we stop paying per print to them. Same as with the ink. They are now paying for the ink themselves. So if they come up with innovation that actually a print requires less ink per page, then that's also beneficial to them. So they're really being pushed to innovate their own products. And we luckily have now printers that are working much more consistently, are better for the environment, and also the costs for us have come down because we're not the owners of the machines. We don't want to be. We don't want to be in that market, that we also use them and then try to find somebody else that buys it once it leaves our offices, let's say. But we are ensured that at least we can continue to print whenever there's a need to. I don't know how much time I still have, but that was my final slide. So I'd like to give the opportunity, if there are any questions, that we can maybe already tackle some of them now.
Any questions for Dylan? I was also wondering, Dylan, do you also make use of the MCI, of the Materials Circularity Index?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So that's is that in the supplier evaluation or?
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on which product, what the component is, but typically we do evaluate suppliers as well on their ability to provide that service.
Okay. Mila has a question. Yeah, can you open your mic, Mila?
Is it working?
Yeah, it's working.
Can you hear me?
Right?
All right. So thank you for the presentation, first of all. You mentioned in the beginning that most of the viewers will probably know Philips from the products that we indeed see still hanging, but that are not produced by Philips anymore. And you mentioned that you're working on no waste from your production sites, but also from your offices and warehouses. I was wondering how much are you focusing on all the other products that you have sold to the world over the past decades? Those are a lot of products that you're not producing anymore. What are you doing about about them not going to waste?
So about the installed base, basically, right? And then you mean the installed base before we sold the product, or what we're currently doing with the ones that still carry the Philips name, but are actually no longer owned by us?
The latter.
Okay. Yeah, so we have obviously agreements with the companies that are allowed to sell under the Philips brand name. And so a lot of those requirements that we then set for them to carry that name are in the space of sustainability. So we expect them to make sure that their supply base is in order. We expect them to make sure that every year their impact to the environment becomes less. And we also expect them to ensure that there is a certain quality that is offered to customers. And so there's a service center at least, and a repairability part that is always required. And so it is, for instance, still Philips customer service that you can contact whenever there's a radio that you have that might break down that carries the Philips name. And then that customer service will try to make sure that that gets repaired or something else. When it comes to the waste handling of that, in most regions in the world, actually, there are now requirements related to old electronic devices being handed in. And then Philips is actually co-owner of the waste handler for that specific part to make sure that that is done in an environmentally friendly way and products are recycled to the best of their ability. But for us to go to a closed loop system, for instance, for products that we no longer manufacture ourselves, where the suppliers are not ours, that is unfortunately something that we cannot do. So there are limitations, but there's definitely nothing that we are, nothing that we're doing.
Thank you.
You're on mute, Corinne, you're on mute.
Thank you, Dylan. There are two other questions, but I would like to suggest to keep them until the end of the session, that we first continue with the other speakers. I hope that's okay for you, Andreas and Santi. Again, thank you, Dylan, and I'll hand over the floor again to Noah now.
Yes, thank you, Corinne. Let's continue with the second round of decisions in the Blue Connection. To just briefly look at this again, please be aware again, this is a crash course a little bit. It's a bit challenging. It's a quick decision making and it's a bit gut feeling. So of course, we could all dive deeper into these decisions, but today is more about getting a little bit of an idea of what decisions are part of this process. And so far, we have decided to have a silver, so a quite intensive maintenance program we have a good frame that is good, quite nicely recyclable and really refurbishable, which is nice as a component. We just saw how important it can be to refurbish components in the speech of Dylan. We have a buyback price of 10%, so 200 euros we offer to the market to buy the bikes back. And we have a refurbishment age until year 8. So we refurbish the product, the bike until the 8th year. And now we look at who we want to work together with. So which recycling service provider we want to work with. And there we have the choice between 4 different ones. Currently we work with one which is just very good at bringing the bikes to the landfill, which we don't want. And now we have to switch to either some who are a bit more expensive, like in disassembly, but then they are really focused on refurbish. They're really good at refurbishing the components. Or we can choose others which are really focused on recycling. So like Green Cycle is really good at recycling. Trashless is good at recycling and good at refurbishing, but therefore they're more expensive. So these are the trade-offs we talked about. So now we can open the question and see, do we want, which of these 4 do we want? So Repairly, really good. So the first one is really good at refurbishing, decent at recycling, a bit more expensive. The second one is really good at recycling, not so good at refurbishing, quite cheap actually. And the third one is really good at refurbishing, not so good at recycling, not too expensive. And the last one is the most expensive one and can do both. So let's see what the answers will bring us. I see the second one, so Green Cycle is getting most votes. Now it's pretty much equal with the third one. All right, and I see the third one seems to be winning this competition. So we choose New Life, which is a company which is really good at refurbishing. So let me change my screen and go to the simulation environment. I will actually share my screen specifically so I can change within here. So here you see the Blue Connection environment. I hope you can all see my screen. And I can now go ahead and choose New Life as as our current recycling service provider. So they are really good at refurbishing. And now I can go back to the presentation, look at the next decision, which is actually what we do with the frame. So as you can see here, we are currently at this stage. So our bikes come back, we decide to fully refurbish them as a product until year 8, which cannot be refurbished. They go to the recycling service provider who is really good at refurbishing components. And now we have to decide what happens with our frame. So we can decide to refurbish our frame and to recycle it, to do only refurbishing, to do only recycling, or to do none of the 4. So now you can vote on this decision. So we can open the vote now. So what do we do? Do we do nothing? So send it to the landfill. Do we refurbish? Do we recycle? Or do we do both? So that's the decision we have to take now. And you can start voting. And of course, be aware that recycling and refurbishing is of course also linked to a cost, and it's linked to a revenue because you save a lot of costs because you don't have to buy those components as new. And if I see correctly, we decide to, oh, it's quite dynamic, this. Okay, so we do both actually. The vote was first for refurbishment, but now we switch to both. So we will refurbish and recycle. So that means that the bikes that come in, they're being disassembled. We refurbish components, and the remaining materials that cannot be refurbished, they are being recycled. Great, so let's go back to the simulation, look at the frame, and then choose both. So we recycle and we refurbish. Excellent. That decision has also been taken. And now actually our last decision is, what do we promise to the market? So how circular is our product now? And we do that with looking at the material circularity indicator, which is again, consists of virgin raw materials. How many of those are we using? How much unrecoverable waste are we creating? how much lifetime does our bike have? So how long does it stay? How long does it stay alive, we could say, and how much is it being used? To give you a reference point, we started with 5%, which is a very linear company, and a highly circular company would be 80%. So those are two reference points which you can use. And based on that, we can now open again the vote and decide again with gut feeling, just intuitively, where we think we are now based on the decisions we took. Did we manage to create a more circular product? And if so, to what extent can we say that we created a circular product? So 10, 25, 40, or 50, that's now the question. Again, very dynamic votes now. I see the answers changing. And it seems like the majority is voting for 25%. Yes, I think most votes are in now. So 25% has been chosen the most. So let's plug that into the simulation. As I said, we started with 5% and now we go to 25, and we can offer that on two sides. At the sales side, we can go to our different sorry, I have to go to agreements where I can have an agreement with our different retailers. So I can tell them, look, the bikes that we are producing have a material circularity index of 25%. So they give us a sales premium. You might have seen that this increased. You can observe it now. So this is now at 1.151. And if I increase it to 25%, it will increase to 1.17. So we get a higher sales premium on our bikes when selling them to our retailers. And same for HBS. You might now wonder, why is this lower, even though they are more the environmentally sensitive customers? Because for them, 25% is not yet a really circular product. So they will give you a really high sales premium if your product is really circular, which they don't think we've reached that stage yet. And that was the last decision. So now I will go on with calculating, and while, not me, actually the business game, the Blue Connection, will calculate how we were doing. And while we do this, I will hand the floor to Hedda and to Corinne to introduce Hedda. And I'm really looking forward to that speech.
Yeah, let me first introduce, thank you, Noah. Great presentation. Let me introduce Hedda first to you. Hedda van Raalte has her master's degree in economics at the University of Groningen. And after doing research on economics in developing countries, she started at Netloyd, a large transport company now overtaken by Maersk, on the edge of ICT and logistics. And ever since, her interest stayed in the field of ICT and logistics. Having worked as an independent consultant for about 20 years, she started to teach at the Rotterdam University of Applied Sciences, logistics management. Her interest is and was to try out new methods of working, to explore new areas. And she introduced the games of InChange of our company at the university and was one of the first to try out the Blue Connection, which we launched last year. This year, the Blue Connection was extended by an assignment to the students to calculate the MCI in practice. That is to say, they had to search for a company to practice what they had learned in the game. And Hedda will now tell us everything about that. And I will share Hedda's presentation now with you. And then I will hand over the floor to Hedda. There you go, Hedda.
You hear me now?
Yeah, can hear you now. And
Yes.
hope, yeah, I think your presentation is also visible.
Yeah, only you cannot see, but never mind. Well,
you
thank
cannot
you.
See. Oh.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Yes, what we did, we played with several students from the Rotterdam University of Applied Sciences. We played this game, Stormwind Bike, and what it was all about alignment on the first side. And of course, you played the game just now by gut feeling, but we asked the students to set out a strategy and then come forward with, well, why they to take these different decisions. Maybe you can have the next sheet with the agenda. Yes, Well, I give you a brief introduction of the Rotterdam University. Then I will tell you something about the assignment. Then we did a follow-up assignment, and I think, especially into this course, it's very interesting to see. And I will tell you what the results were. Well, about the Rotterdam University of Applied Sciences, it has 7 institutes with a very wide range of educational tracks, for instance, from art till electric engineering, but also care is part of it, and logistics management is also a bachelor degree that you can have there. And within this logistics management, in the 3rd year, the students are playing the game of the Blue Connection, and they get some idea about circular economy. And we played last year, yeah, the next sheet please. We played last year this game with 160 students, and the students played the game for 4 different rounds. And after these 4 rounds, we asked them to apply the lessons learned in practice, and they had to look for a company themselves. We didn't give them the companies. Well, we helped them, of course, a little bit, but mostly they found the companies themselves. And they calculated the MCI and the ROI for these different companies, of course, for selected procedures. And I think it was very interesting because, well, first of all, it was a challenge for the students to start thinking circular, and then to try to connect to companies. Well, what is the challenge within a company to make it more circular? So they really applied what they have learned there. And finally, they came up with 25 different companies where they applied the results. And I think there's one in between, because there's the companies that they applied. There's one sheet missing, I think. Well, anyway, there's the companies that they applied the different calculations were, for instance, typically steel companies. Yeah, that one. Wait, oops. The steel companies, electronic appliances. Well, of course, that's like Philips. The food industry and furniture, and of course other furniture from Gispe, for instance. They have a program also in circular economy. I don't know whether you are aware of, in the Netherlands, there is the largest peel reusing company built just recently in Den Bosch. And orange peels are being reused. The companies that our students selected in food industry were more like bakeries. And of course, bakery, it's very difficult. Well, what can you make more recyclable? But then more or less it was about packaging. You can, of course, save a lot by using packaging. But the most interesting, I think, is the steel and metal industry, because it's business to business kind of company working, or the different companies that were applied these metrics to. It's business to business. And for the receiving businesses, it was also very important to get more circular ideas within their company. And for the students, of course, it was a real challenge to have it as a backpack when they will be working there. The next sheet. We applied, the next sheet, please. Yeah. I give you one example, and that is the company 7 Solutions. It is a company who produces gas detection equipment, and this gas detection equipment supplier is delivering, is purchasing metal to make this equipment, and they have branches all over. The producing branches all over Europe, Belgium, Poland, UK, and Germany, and the customers are all over. And now the idea was, well, how can they reduce their, how can they increase their material circularity index? And the students came up with very interesting results. That's the next sheet, because we asked them per role, what are the results? And for instance, the purchasing manager came up with, change the Chinese supplier to, for instance, South Korean supplier, because in South Korea there's already a more sustainable way of producing than in China. In China, for instance, the products life cycle of the produce, none of the products is 2 years, while in fact they could be maintained 5 years, but they're thrown away. So that's a pity, and therefore they suggested, well, buy it in South Korea. Well, of course, maybe Europe would be more sustainable, but that is a very big impact on the ROI, of course, as well. Then the sales went for extended lifetime, because now the lifetime was rather short, as I just mentioned, and so they could do something about extended lifetime. Then for the other roles, yes, the next sheet, please. The supply chain manager, of course, it's very important to have enough capacity within the company to recycle or to refurbish. Just now in the game, and that with your gut feeling polls, you don't realize really that, of course, you need the capacity within your company. If products are coming back, well, how will you handle them? So you have to prepare for that as well. And then finally, the finance. Of course, you want to increase your cash flow, or at least have enough cash flow to invest further. And of course, you might use, but now I'm directing to another game from InChange, to use financial tools to increase the working capital. Because if you do well, maybe you get a lower interest rate with the bank to invest in new developments. Well, this is very briefly now about what we did with the students. But the most important thing is, I think, the next sheet, please. The most important thing is, on the one hand, for the students, that they really see, well, we have them first set out a strategy, maintain log files, and look what the deviations were from the interventions that they made versus what they expected, as written down in their log file, because that's a big lesson learned. Why is it different than what you have, the outcome than what you expected? But the very important thing is that the 4 roles, they really have to align to have good results. Because if sales says, okay, we sell them low service, and purchasing is saying, okay, we want really reliable products, and then of course you have a big problem. So on the one hand, the alignment is very important, and the other hand is the circularity is of course very important, that these students are youngsters who will enter the labor market and come into these big enterprises and smaller enterprises, and they have now in their backpack their circular way of thinking. And I think the Blue Connection is a very good tool to now stimulate this kind of thinking to the students. That was the presentation.
Thank you so much, Hedda. Any questions at this moment for Hedda? We could also save them until the end. I had one question, Hedda, because the students had to calculate the return on investment and the material circularity index. Yeah. But I can imagine that's quite a job for them to do that based on the information provided by the company.
I agree, especially the return on investment was rather difficult for them. So mostly they focused in practice to calculate the MCI. That's true.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And I guess also the companies were quite collaborative also with the financials, but yeah.
Yes. And they are very interested. For them, it was a new way of thinking. Well, how can you increase both indicators?
Yeah.
And it's not always that it's going against the return on investment. That's one other thing, but that will be my personal play. In practice now, the CO2 exhaust and all the what's going on in the environmental pollution, it's not calculated in now macroeconomic what is it? dollars or euros or whatever. And so if there is an economic way of thinking that not only labor and capital is expressed in cost, but also the environmental impact, then of course you would have totally different calculations.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's another discussion.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for this bridge, like we mentioned before, from academics really to practice, and how you work with your students to make them aware of how practice really works, but also making the companies aware of the fact that, because I think there, you probably agree to that, there's still a lot of awareness that has to be created there. Great lecture about this. Okay, then yeah, later on there will be more room for questions. Noah, do you want to take over again and do the debrief of the Blue Connection now? So what are the results? Have you been able to do the calculation?
Yes, I have. And we can look at the simulation now and look at how we did, because that's always, of course, one of the most exciting parts. Sometimes we say the gameplay is only the excuse for the debrief, because that's when the learning really comes into play. And here we see in the cockpit as we call it, the two key indicators. Return on investment has plummeted a little bit, and circularity has risen up quite considerably. I must say that we've done quite well in terms of circularity. So we went to almost 40%, which is more than we expected, actually. And I must also say that minus 4.7, so only a 4% decrease, is quite good for the first round. We see oftentimes teams being completely overwhelmed. Maybe that's because we went so quickly through it, so you remembered always exactly the decision from before, so you could link them. But I must say we did quite well, and we can now look at why that's the case by diving a bit into the different elements of the simulation. So we can look at the finance tab and depreciation graph, because that gives us a lot of insights already. So we can see now on this graph that, let me zoom in a little bit. Oopla, it's maybe a bit too much. That we have created a long lifetime of our bikes. So our bikes last really long. The second-hand value stays up until year 8. We do refurbish them until year 8, so that's nice. Until that year, we still get bikes back, and we can refurbish them and sell them. If you compare now the buyback price, which is intersecting with the second-hand value here, you might consider to decrease the refurbishment age to 6, for example, so that the bikes that come back, that you only resell them on the second-hand market until year 6, where it's still profitable to do so. Remember, you have to refurbish them still, so that's an extra cost. And then you still do that in a profitable way, and in year 7 and year 8, you might lose some money on that operation. But still, we made it quite well. The buyback price seems to be at a decent level. What else can we see from these graphs? Yeah, we get around 25, around 40% of the bikes back, which is quite nice. That's quite a good number for a company that was acting linear beforehand. And what we can also do, and something I forgot to mention before, is I also negotiated with the bank, the MCI, so they gave us a better interest rate. But within the finance department, we can of course see the income statement, and that's of course an insight that gives us many different clues on what we did right and what we did wrong. So we see that revenues increased, second-hand sales. That's one of the reasons why they increased. So that's nice. If we compare second-hand sales with returned products, so how much we paid for the products that came back, that almost breaks even. So if you add on this the refurbishment cost, you see that we do lose some money with that operation. So maybe we can fine-tune there, but to be honest, we did quite well on that side. Other elements we can look at is the capacity that Hedda just mentioned, that you also have to look at. We didn't really consider that decision in this crash course today, but you can also edit the maintenance and refurbishment capacity that you offer in terms of full-time employees. And we see that in terms of overflow, so people that had to do extra hours, we didn't have too many costs on that side. So we can just increase maintenance capacity by a little bit, and then that's fine-tuned. But a big problem we had was we didn't have enough labor to take care of the 8 years of refurbishment that we do with our bikes. So that's something we really could fine-tune now. But that's of course a decision we didn't look at, so you couldn't really have anticipated this. What else can we see from the income statement? We can see within the finance costs that our bank might be a bit too weak, so we might need a better bank. But for the rest, we have quite a 4 million loss, so we're not profitable yet. But if we adjust the capacity for refurbishment, you can see that already only this decision would help us to go back to positive numbers. Now, talking about fine-tuning. So as you can see, we are quite close to becoming profitable and circular, which is great. So now we can talk strategy. And strategy that we choose, now looking at the decisions we took, is actually refurbishing the components of our product. So maybe indeed decreasing the age until which we sell the bike on a second-hand market, and instead getting more bikes to our recycling service provider who is really specialized in refurbishing. And we have also chosen a frame that is highly refurbishable. That would maybe improve our operations. So there we can see that we now choose, we try to do a bit of everything. So we try to refurbish, we try to recycling, we try to sell on the second-hand market. And sometimes it's easier, especially in the beginning of going circular, to only focus on one or two elements. So maybe focusing on a recycling service provider who is good at refurbishing only, choosing a frame that is really highly refurbishable, and then only focusing on that first until you're profitable, and then you can maybe bring in the recycling part as well of materials. But overall, we did really well, and I think that also shows that the audience today was, I think, already quite knowledgeable about the circular economy and aware of the different strategies and the decisions. And actually, I would love to keep playing a few more rounds with this audience, with you guys, to see how you would maybe improve, or maybe even try too much in the next round and then make a bit more of a loss. That's always exciting to see. But I'm sure in the third round we would have a pretty good idea of what strategy we would have and where it would take us, and what we could fine tune to really implement a successful circular strategy. And with that, I think we can finish the gameplay part of today, and go to the last part, which I will hand over to you, to you, Corinne, again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Noah. I think really interesting to see what came out of this.
Did I maybe miss something in the debrief? Did you see something that you think we could have improved? We could have actually offered more circularity to the market. We did better than we expected.
Yeah. This was, of course, the first round, and usually in the second rounds you can fine tune even more.
Yes.
What I always like is that you are working both on the material circularity index and the return on investment, because that's kind of the main message there as well, is that if you want to become circular, that it also needs to be circular, it needs to be profitable, and that's also the message that HEDA's students also try to bring to those companies. First of all, I want to thank you all for being here, but I think there's also a few questions still. One question that I have for Nanya is, you have those 60,000 suppliers, and you want to make agreements with them, and I'm really curious how you do that. So how large is your team doing that?
Yeah, of course, that will take some time, definitely. So it's actually something that is not a separate team or a separate person having this task, but it's integrated into all our category managers in our sourcing department. So this is something that just goes into the contracts, into the tenders, in line with everything else that we put in there. And then, of course, we have some specific suppliers that we're targeting, where I have one of my colleagues also participating in some of the meetings with the suppliers, and also at top management level, to convince them that this is the way to go. So this has been actually something we've been working with previously, also preparing them and starting to collaborate with some of them that are actually also interested themselves. And now we have made kind of a shift, saying we want you to do this. You must do this to comply. So I think we do still not know the exact amount of time that we will spend on doing this conversion together with the suppliers. But I think in some cases it will just be a requirement, and if they cannot live up to that, we'll choose another supplier. So in some cases it just means that we'll be selecting suppliers based on this, and maybe not spending a lot more time on this.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. There was also a question from Andreas to Dylan. Thank you so much. I'm just reading the question of Andreas. Or Andreas, why don't you ask the question yourself? That's maybe nicer. Yeah.
All right. Yes, I will try to. I will just scroll up to my question. It was all right.
Andreas is in supply chain management. He's an educator, also a researcher in supply chain management at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology in Germany.
Yes, you're right. And actually also a startup founder recently.
Okay. Nice.
Yes, but unfortunately it's not a circular economy. However, it's still sustainable management. So I have a question. So first, thank you very much for the presentation. However, currently the companies profit from shorter product life cycles and the linear economy. But with the circular economy, the product life cycles must increase and the profit of the companies will decrease as a consequence. So how do you satisfy the needs of investors?
It's a very good question. It's typically a shift towards services that then compensates for moving less boxes, let's say. So if you look at the products that we have put out, then more revenues are coming from making sure that those products continue to operate how you want them to. So for instance, from maintenance activities. Also, since then, we've simply reinvented ourselves a little bit in terms of more software solutions, service solutions that rely much less on just selling a one-off tangible product. But it's definitely something that requires some upfront investment, but also a close look indeed at the old business model, because if you are a product manufacturer and that is what you continue to want to make your revenues from, and the only change that you're making is that your products will last longer, then obviously that will eat away from your revenues and your profit, and investors will probably not be too impressed. But if you look at it for Philips at least, investors are actually very excited about this notion, also because they see a lot of risks for a traditional product manufacturer to continue to do so with all the stress on resources and supply chains being under pressure, saying that, hey, that model is maybe not going to last forever. And then if you deal with long-term investors, they're going to be very challenging on that. And they very much like then that embracement of a circular economy principle in your own company organization.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. There was also a question from James. That was more to Hedda. The students carried out this game in cooperation with companies. Has there been any indication that they've been followed, that the companies followed the advice of the students?
Yeah, that's a bit too fast already. And they just did it last quarter, and we didn't really, but I think it's a good suggestion. We didn't really know, what is it? That you have to do a kind of
Evaluation or so.
Yeah, evaluation on the results, whether they are being used or not. So usually it's first creating the awareness, and then of course these companies have to set up a whole strategy where they have to, or where they can apply these results. But it's not a quick win, boom, 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 they'll do it. Yeah.
It's early to say,
Yeah, that's difficult.
And then there was a question of Moritz. I'm also teaching a course on CE at my university. I'm wondering if there's a possibility to integrate the Blue Connection in the course. Of course there is, yeah. And if you want to know more, then you can ask us, either Noah or myself. Are there any more questions at this moment for the participants? We are 5 o'clock now, so right on time, just in time. This is logistics, supply chain management. But if there are any more questions for the speakers, no? Then I would like to thank you all very much for being here, especially the keynote speakers for having making time to do this. And I think personally, I think it was a very interesting session, and we have recorded it as well. So if you would like to share it somewhere, then please feel free to ask us. Yeah, and hope to see you again at any occasion and talk about circular strategy again. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
you.
everyone.